For 15 years, I did everything right. Worked overtime. Skipped vacations. Stayed quiet when life was hard, all for a kid who called me dad before she even knew my last name. I raised her from 3 years old. Fed her. Taught her. Protected her. Loved her. Then one day, my world cracked. The bank treated me like a liability. My company's HR stopped returning calls. Friends and colleagues spoke to me in careful, rehearsed sentences. I thought I'd made a mistake. Until I saw it, a document. Filed in my name. Polished, professional, and precise. It accused me of controlling my stepdaughter's life for years. I hadn't written a word of it. And that's when I realized, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. A trap built the moment my Apple stock crossed 8 figures, by the people closest to me, the ones I trusted most. And now, they thought they were in control. They were wrong. Before everything broke, my life was the kind that doesn't make noise. I'm Calvin Rourke. 45. Senior Operations Manager at Ironclad Distribution. I've spent most of my adult life inside warehouses, concrete floors, steel shelving, forklifts humming before sunrise. It's not glamorous work. No one applauds inventory accuracy. But if you do it long enough, you learn something valuable. Consistency compounds. I wasn't ambitious in the flashy sense. I didn't need recognition. I needed stability. I grew up in a house where stability disappeared overnight, bills unpaid, lights shut off, promises broken. I decided early that if I ever had a family, unpredictability wouldn't be part of it. That decision is what brought me to Marianne. When we met 15 years ago, she was already established, sharp, articulate, intimidating in a way that didn't ask for permission. A civil and family lawyer. She liked order. I liked structure. It felt aligned. She also had a 3-year-old daughter. Lydia. The first time I met her, she hid behind Marianne's leg and stared at me like I was a temporary fixture. Which, to be fair, I was. Most men before me had been. I didn't try to win her over. I just showed up. I learned which cereal she'd actually eat. Which nightlight color kept her asleep. I memorized pediatrician numbers and school calendars. When she got sick at 2 a.m., it was my shoulder she leaned on in the waiting room. Blood doesn't make someone a parent. Repetition does. Marianne's career intensified over the years. Longer hours. Higher profile cases. More pressure. I adjusted without resentment. Someone had to anchor the routine, and I was good at being the anchor. Lydia started calling me dad when she was 6. Not because anyone told her to. Because I was the one there. Financially, I operated the same way I worked, quiet, consistent, disciplined. Years before I married Marianne, my old supervisor at North Bay Logistics pushed me into buying Apple stock. Said I was thinking too small. Said long-term thinking separates survivors from planners. I took a risk I wouldn't normally take. $90,000 at $11 a share. Then I kept buying. Small chunks. Bonuses. Raises. Tax returns. I didn't talk about it. Didn't frame it as strategy. It was just another form of consistency. By the time Lydia turned 18, the portfolio had crossed 8 figures. I didn't celebrate. I didn't announce it. But Marianne knew. And that's when things changed, not dramatically, not loudly, just subtly enough to make me question my own instincts. She started asking about estate structures. About asset protection. About what would happen if something unexpected occurred. Lydia became observant. Not distant. Not cold. Just watchful. Like she was evaluating something instead of participating in it. Conversations shortened. Jokes landed differently. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers pull away. Lawyers think ahead. Money complicates dynamics. But there's a specific kind of silence that isn't random. It's coordinated. I didn't recognize it yet. I just felt the temperature drop. And in a house I'd held steady for 15 years. I suddenly wasn't sure where I stood. The first real warning didn't come from Lydia. It didn't come from Marianne. It came in an email. A simple attachment. No subject line, just, "Please review and advise." I opened it in my truck, engine still running, coffee in hand. The heading used my full legal name, Calvin James Rourke, the version of me I only saw on tax filings and loan documents. The tone was cold, clinical, polished, professional. A statement of concern filed in my name. Alleging restrictive oversight of Lydia's life. Controlled finances. Limited autonomy. Emotional dependency. Each paragraph careful. Qualified. Reasonable enough that someone glancing at it might believe it. The signature at the bottom? Mine. Or something so close it could fool a casual eye. A digitized version, pulled from old records, perfectly placed. No one had to forge it dramatically. It was just convincing. I didn't scream. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't move. I sat there, staring at the screen, heart racing. 15 years of routine, discipline, and sacrifice, boiled down to a document I never wrote. When I got home, the house felt strange. Lydia in her room. Marianne at the counter, scrolling on her tablet. She looked up, smiled. Calm. Routine. Unaware. Long day, she asked. Yes, I said. The word sounded hollow. That night, I replayed every rule, every limit, every moment of parenting discipline. Curfews. Budget limits. Screen time. All normal. All now weaponized. The next morning, my credit card company flagged my account. Routine review, they said. My work badge triggered a manual check. Not accusations. Not confrontations. Just friction. Enough to make me feel observed. Finally, I confronted Lydia, carefully. She didn't deny it. She just said, I needed help explaining things. Those words landed heavier than any accusation could. Because kids don't explain things like that on their own. Someone had taught her the language. And that's when I realized the document wasn't about the past. It was about control. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. Once you realize a lie has structure, you start seeing the beams holding it up. I stopped reacting. I started reading. Not just the document from the bank, everything connected to it. Follow-up notes. Internal memos. Clarification requests. The same phrases repeating across institutions like carbon copies. Pattern of oversight. Risk indicators. Limited financial autonomy. No teenager talks like that. Even more telling, the wording wasn't emotional. It didn't describe arguments, anger, or fear. It described process. Designed to survive scrutiny, not to convince hearts, but to manipulate systems. That's when I pulled the metadata. The original file wasn't created on Lydia's laptop. It hadn't even been edited there. The first draft came from a professional document suite, licensed, tracked, updated regularly. The kind of software lawyers use. Every change time-stamped. Every author accounted for. I didn't confront Marianne. I watched her instead. She moved through the house with the calm certainty of someone already predicting outcomes. Calls behind closed doors. Quiet meetings. Subtle coaching. Lydia's responses weren't curious or questioning. They were measured. Rehearsed. Then I noticed something that made my stomach sink. A week before the document surfaced, I overheard Lydia in the kitchen, whispering, "I just don't want to end up with nothing." Marianne's voice was smooth, calm. "You won't. That's why we plan ahead." "From Dad?" "From uncertainty," Marianne said. Uncertainty. That was all it took. No lies. No dramatics. Just the suggestion that security wasn't guaranteed. And once that idea is planted, in an 18-year-old about to step into adulthood, it grows fast. She started watching. Listening. Repeating phrases. Not because she fully understood, but because she was being guided to say the right thing. I tested it. One evening, I casually mentioned I was thinking about selling part of my portfolio. Just a thought, nothing committed. Lydia didn't react. Marianne didn't react. But by morning, my brokerage account logged a capacity verification notice. That's when it hit me. The document wasn't about what I had done. It was about what I could do next. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was control. And someone had been teaching my daughter exactly how to help. Once you realize a lie has structure, you start seeing the beams holding it up. I stopped reacting. I started reading. Not just the document from the bank, everything connected to it. Follow-up notes. Internal memos. Clarification requests. The same phrases repeating across institutions like carbon copies. Pattern of oversight. Risk indicators. Limited financial autonomy. No teenager talks like that. Even more telling, the wording wasn't emotional. It didn't describe arguments, anger, or fear. It described process. Designed to survive scrutiny, not to convince hearts, but to manipulate systems. That's when I pulled the metadata. The original file wasn't created on Lydia's laptop. It hadn't even been edited there. The first draft came from a professional document suite, licensed, tracked, updated regularly. The kind of software lawyers use. Every change time-stamped. Every author accounted for. I didn't confront Marianne. I watched her instead. She moved through the house with the calm certainty of someone already predicting outcomes. Calls behind closed doors. Quiet meetings. Subtle coaching. Lydia's responses weren't curious or questioning. They were measured. Rehearsed. Then I noticed something that made my stomach sink. A week before the document surfaced, I overheard Lydia in the kitchen, whispering, "I just don't want to end up with nothing." Marianne's voice was smooth, calm. "You won't. That's why we plan ahead." "From Dad?" "From uncertainty," Marianne said. Uncertainty. That was all it took. No lies. No dramatics. Just the suggestion that security wasn't guaranteed. And once that idea is planted, in an 18-year-old about to step into adulthood, it grows fast. She started watching. Listening. Repeating phrases. Not because she fully understood, but because she was being guided to say the right thing. I tested it. One evening, I casually mentioned I was thinking about selling part of my portfolio. Just a thought, nothing committed. Lydia didn't react. Marianne didn't react. But by morning, my brokerage account logged a capacity verification notice. That's when it hit me. The document wasn't about what I had done. It was about what I could do next. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was control. And someone had been teaching my daughter exactly how to help. Once you see the frame, you can't unsee the picture. I stopped trying to defend myself. That instinct, to explain, clarify, argue my case, was exactly what the document anticipated. Emotional reactions. Defensive words. Anything that could be reframed as instability. So I went quiet. At work, I smiled. I answered HR's questions in writing only. Short. Factual. No adjectives. At the bank, I acknowledged the review without protest. Let them think I was confused. Maybe overwhelmed. At home, I did something harder. I acted normal. Cooked dinner. Asked Lydia about college applications. Listened while Marianne discussed her cases. Nodded at phrases like, "These situations are delicate," or "institutions must be careful." She never said my name. Never referred to me directly. Everything was professional. Distant. Calculated. Behind the scenes, I began reconstructing my life like a forensic analyst. 15 years of brokerage statements. Every Apple purchase. Every dividend reinvestment. Emails from North Bay Logistics, my old boss's encouragement to invest early, personally, not as a family plan. Property deeds. Mortgage payoffs. Car titles. All in my name. Clear, clean lines. Then I noticed something else. The document wasn't meant to end anything. It was meant to start processes. Every institution touched by it had follow-up pathways, evaluations, reviews, support plans. Steps that escalated automatically if boxes were checked. Lack of cooperation. Emotional resistance. Refusal to acknowledge concern. I was being maneuvered toward a corner where the system itself could step in, neutral, impartial, justified. And the most dangerous part? Lydia was positioned as the victim and the beneficiary. She didn't need to lie loudly. She just had to agree quietly when professionals filled in the blanks. I watched her rehearse. Not out loud, but in posture, in timing. Pausing before answers. Using phrases like, "It's complicated," or "I don't want to say too much." Adult professionals lean in and assume the worst. One night, I stood outside Marianne's study. She was on the phone. Voice low. Controlled. "No, not yet. He's still cooperative." "That's good. The paper trail matters." Paper trail. I walked away before she noticed me. By then, the picture was complete. They weren't trying to steal my money. That would have been crude. Traceable. They were trying to make it reasonable for someone else to step in, to manage it for me. And once that door opens, ownership doesn't matter. I made a choice that night. I wasn't going to stop the trap. I was going to let it finish building. So I could seal it shut, with them inside. The hardest part wasn't pretending nothing was wrong. It was pretending I didn't understand exactly how wrong it was. I let the reviews continue. I signed acknowledgments. Attended supportive meetings where people spoke slowly, carefully, like I might shatter if they used a normal tone. At Ironclad, HR stopped calling it a concern. They started calling it a process. My manager, a decent man who had never questioned my performance, avoided eye contact when he asked if everything at home was stable. I answered yes. Always yes. At the bank, they assigned me a case officer. She explained asset oversight protocols with rehearsed empathy. Not threatening. Just firm enough to make it clear, if the narrative continued, this wasn't optional. I didn't push back. That was the mistake they expected me to make, the one I refused to give them. At home, Marianne grew more confident. I could see it in subtle ways. How she corrected Lydia's phrasing mid-sentence. How she asked leading questions and nodded when Lydia repeated them. How she referred to my investments as the family portfolio, without even checking if I was in the room. Lydia asked one evening, casually, "Do Apple stock dividends count as joint income?" I told her I wasn't sure. That answer traveled faster than any accusation. A week later, I received a preliminary notice suggesting a voluntary financial capacity evaluation. Voluntary, in the same way a storm warning is voluntary. Decline, and it escalates. They were close. Close enough that Marianne stopped hiding the endgame. One evening, she left a draft open on her tablet, angled just enough for me to see as I passed. I didn't stop. Didn't need to. The title was enough: Proposed Framework for Shared Asset Stewardship. Stewardship. Not ownership. That single word told me everything. They weren't planning to steal the money. They were planning to stand over it. To decide how it moved. Where it went. Who benefited. And eventually, who replaced me. I waited until they thought I was fully boxed in. Until the oversight requests lined up across institutions. Until the language stopped being hypothetical. Until Marianne discussed next steps with the calm certainty of someone who believed the law was already on her side. Only then did I make my first move. I didn't call a family lawyer. I hired a litigation firm specializing in preemptive asset defense, people who don't argue facts. They weaponize timelines. I handed them 15 years of records. And for the first time since this started, someone looked at me and said, "They built their case too early." That's when I knew I was going to win. Not because I was innocent, though I was. But because they tried to rewrite history before checking who actually wrote it. And once that door opened, I didn't have to fight. I just had to let the truth arrive, all at once. Once the litigation team took over, my job was simple. Do nothing. Sounds easy in theory. Feels unnatural in practice. Meetings happen without me. Decisions about my competence circulate in rooms I'm not invited to. People assume what I'll do next, all without asking me. But silence was the strategy. My attorneys didn't rush. They mapped everything backward, not from the accusation, but from the intended outcome. They showed me how the language in that document was designed to trigger a chain reaction. How the timing aligned perfectly with Lydia turning 18. How the phrase, family-directed investing, wasn't accidental. It was a bridge, a legal cue meant to make my assets negotiable. Then they did something Marianne never expected. They filed first. Not a defense. A declaratory judgment. It landed quietly, just like the original document had. No press. No drama. Just a clean, devastating request: formally recognize my Apple portfolio, my house, and my vehicle as sole, separate property. Acquired independently. Managed without marital involvement. Attached was a timeline so surgical it felt unreal. Every Apple purchase traced to my personal accounts. Every dividend reinvestment logged. Emails from my old boss at North Bay Logistics, years before the marriage, showing explicit encouragement to invest, not as a family plan, but personal financial discipline. Metadata from drafts Lydia had submitted, the same professional software, editing patterns, and legal phrasing Marianne used herself. The guillotine didn't fall all at once. It descended in stages. First, the bank withdrew its oversight notice. Quietly. No apology. Just confirmation, no further action required. Then Ironclad's HR reclassified the process as resolved. My performance review reinstated. My manager remembered how valuable I was. At home, the change was immediate. Marianne became tense. Not openly angry, but controlled panic replaced her calm. She stopped coaching Lydia, stopped correcting phrasing, stopped discussing next steps. Because the steps were gone. The real collapse came when the court scheduled a preliminary hearing, not about my behavior, but her conduct. Conflict of interest. Undisclosed legal assistance. Narrative engineering. Marianne had spent her career skirting the lines. This time, she crossed them. Lydia didn't understand at first. She thought it was still leverage. Negotiable. Something to be managed with the right phrasing. She came to me one evening, voice trembling but practiced. "Why are you doing this? We were just trying to make it fair." Fair. I looked at her and saw what she truly was, not a victim, not a mastermind, just a child handed a story and told it would save her future. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I let the court filings do the talking. When the judge formally recognized my assets as separate property, it was over. Legally. Financially. Irreversibly. The portfolio? Untouchable. The house? Mine. The car? Mine. There was nothing left to steward. Graham Holt, Marianne's ex, vanished. Calls unanswered. Presence gone. Confidence evaporated the moment he realized there was no money to extract. Lydia broke first. Not dramatically. Just collapsed. The realization hit all at once: she'd burned the only bridge holding her steady for a future that no longer existed. Marianne held on longer. Lawyers believe themselves immune. She wasn't. Quiet warnings. Professional distance. Invitations stopped coming. Credibility cracked. And the night she finally understood that the law she tried to weaponize had turned on her, she cried. Not for Lydia. Not for me. For the money she'd already spent in her head. For the life she thought she'd inherit. For the certainty she mistook for control. I watched it happen without saying a word. By then, I didn't need to win emotionally. They'd lost everything that made the betrayal worth attempting. Winning on paper is one thing. Watching people realize they've lost is something else entirely. The first real breakdown didn't happen in court. It happened at the kitchen table, the same one where Lydia and I had done homework for years. The same surface where I'd signed permission slips and college forms without thinking twice. Lydia sat across from me, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. No rehearsed language this time. No careful pauses. Just raw confusion leaking through fear. They said it would just mean supervision, she whispered. That it wouldn't hurt you. That it was temporary. I stayed silent. Not out of cruelty, but because this was the first moment in months where no one was feeding her words. They said, she continued, voice cracking, that once things were stable, everything would be fair. That I'd be safe. Safe. I finally spoke. Safe from what? She opened her mouth. Closed it again. Tears spilling before she even realized it. There was no answer. Because the danger had never been me. It had been the idea that $8.5 million belonged to someone who didn't understand the cost of earning it. Marianne tried a different angle. She waited until Lydia left the room, then approached me like a colleague instead of a spouse. Calm. Professional. Controlled. She talked about miscommunication. Overreach. How things had gone further than intended. She even apologized, not for what she'd done, but for how it looked. That was the moment she lost me completely. Systems don't write drafts. Systems don't edit phrasing. Systems don't coach children on how to sound credible. People do. And she was one of them. The final humiliation came slowly. Her own peers began treating her like a liability. She'd built her career on discretion, on being trusted behind closed doors. But word travels fast when a lawyer crosses an ethical line for personal gain. Clients asked for second opinions. Judges asked more questions than usual. Invitations stopped coming. Professional trust evaporated. Nothing overt. Nothing actionable. Just enough friction to make every day harder than the last. Graham Holt never came back. The man who had reappeared with nostalgia and promises disappeared the moment he understood the math. No fortune. No leverage. No future. That abandonment hit Lydia harder than anything else. She'd burned her relationship with me, believing there was a safety net on the other side. Instead, she found herself standing between two adults who no longer wanted responsibility, just damage control. One night, she knocked on my door. Not demanded. Not rehearsed. Just knocked. "I didn't think you'd really lose everything," she said. "They made it sound like you'd be fine. Like it was just paperwork." I looked at her and realized something. This was the first time she was seeing consequences without a script. "You didn't ask," I replied. She nodded, sobbing. I didn't comfort her. Because some lessons don't land if they're softened. I didn't yell. I didn't punish. I didn't gloat. I let the silence teach the lesson the law already had. By then, the house felt empty even when it wasn't. The dynamic that had once made it a family was gone, replaced by awkward politeness and regret that arrived too late to matter. And in that quiet, I finally felt something unexpected. Relief. Because the people who had tried to erase me no longer had leverage. No money to chase. No story to sell. No authority to hide behind. All they had was the wreckage of a plan that worked perfectly, until it didn't. And I was already walking away. I didn't leave the house right away. Not out of sentiment, but because I refused to let my exit look like defeat. For a few weeks, I stayed. Went to work. Came home. Cooked my own meals. Paid my bills. Moved through the space like someone who had already accepted that the chapter was over, even if the others hadn't caught up yet. Marianne stopped pretending after that. No arguments. No strategizing. No mention of the law. The confidence she'd worn so easily had collapsed inward, replaced by bitterness and exhaustion. She had miscalculated, not just legally, but in underestimating the man she thought she could outmaneuver. Lydia avoided me. When she did speak, it was careful, quiet, like stepping on broken glass. I could tell she wanted forgiveness. Not because she understood what she'd done, but because forgiveness felt safer than accountability. I didn't give her either. Not because I hated her. But because some lessons don't land if they're softened. A month later, I moved out, not in the night, not quietly. I bought a place closer to work, clean, unencumbered, and transferred my routine there without drama. The house remained mine, but I let them stay temporarily. Not as a favor. As a reminder of what they'd failed to take. Ironclad promoted me that quarter. Nothing flashy. Recognition. Stability. Respect restored. My portfolio continued growing, untouched, unquestioned. The discipline that built it kept doing its job. Life didn't explode into happiness. It settled. That's the part people misunderstand about revenge. The real kind doesn't end in chaos. It ends in clarity. Graham Holt? A footnote. A name that stopped appearing. A presence that never existed beyond opportunity. Marianne's career never regained its old trajectory. She stayed employed. Licensed. Careful, which was its own punishment. Lawyers live on reputation. Once it cracks, everything becomes harder. As for Lydia, she learned something most people never do. Trust, once spent, doesn't regenerate on demand. People who carry you quietly for years don't owe endless chances. Money doesn't change who people are, it only reveals who was waiting. I kept my assets. I kept my name. I kept my future. What I lost was an illusion, and I lost it before it could cost me everything else. And if there's one thing 15 years in warehouses taught me, it's this. Anything worth building takes time. Anything worth keeping takes boundaries. I walked away with both.